Hi, I'm Brandon Cross with Node, and I'm going to talk today about virtual machines. So, I've been asked a question recently about virtual machines, which is what do they do, and what are the reasons for having them, and what are the pros and the cons of the same? And this is a really good question. I thought would be a great thing to shoot a YouTube video on for everybody to see because a lot of people have this question. This is a great opportunity to really just go through the small business applications of virtual machines because that's really where I focus is small business. Virtual machines apply to the whole range of IT. The large enterprises, the big data centers that host the infrastructure for the large enterprises, and then all the way down, trickles down to the desktops even and small business and everybody. Virtualization is something that's going to, I call it the future of hardware. Because really, what virtualization is going to let us get to is taking our hardware, simplifying it, and running our complicated systems somewhere else. Some reasons why we want to use virtualization: we want to consolidate hardware by using it. So we might actually have multiple computers that could run on one physical machine, and we may be able to consolidate some hardware that way. The hardware consolidation really applies the best to the big data centers, though. These are the guys that have 10,000 computers, 10,000 servers and things, and they might be able to get a 10-to-1 ratio on hardware consolidation by going to virtualization, because you install the virtual servers on a piece of physical hardware, but one piece of physical hardware can run multiple virtual servers. So you can take a load you were getting 10,000 servers with, and you can bring that down to 1,000 servers, for example. But there's a lot of complexities in doing that, and balances and different things that apply to the data center world we're not even talking about here. So consolidating hardware when you're using virtualization in small business is less applicable than it is in the big companies, but it's still very important. I've seen instances where we have, let's say, some older hardware that we might have 4 old servers that we can run on one new server and add an additional virtual machine to that to run some new application loads that we weren't running before, and do it from less hardware. So this can take the infrastructure costs and the complexity, the weight of your network, for example, and bring it down by saying we're going to have this one physical piece of hardware instead of 5 or 6 physical pieces of hardware. That's a good reason to use virtualization. Isolating software environments is another reason why we use it. When you put a piece of software on a server, that's fine. But when you add another piece of software and another piece and another piece, and you add all this software together, and so now you have one box that's running like 10 applications and it's doing 50 different roles or something like that, you end up with some conflicts happening between this application and that application. Oh, well, this program needs this version of SQL and that version of .NET running on the operating system, but this other program needs a different version of this, or these two dependencies that these other programs need, they conflict with each other somehow, and we're having issues. Okay, well, virtualization is great for that because you really want to isolate your software into different environments. That's one of the #1 reasons why people end up with 10 servers in their environment, is because suddenly they find out, well, this group wants their own dedicated environment for the accounting software, and this guy wants a dedicated environment for this piece of control software, and we need another dedicated environment for this other software, and next thing you know, my customer relationship management package and my web server and my email server, file server, print server, all these different pieces of hardware suddenly start getting just dropped onto your network. It's good because you're keeping these application loads separate, but it's really expensive because now you got all this hardware. Or what ends up happening is you say, I'm not going to buy 10 servers. I'm just going to buy one, put all the software on that. Will it work? You ask your IT guy, shrugs his shoulders. Yeah, it'll work. Okay, I'm going to do that. It's going to cost me a lot less money, and of course it'll work. Well, it'll work with conflicts from the dependencies and all that good stuff. So virtual machines let us take, let's say, your email server, run it in its own environment, your accounting software system, run it in its own environment, and your customer relationship management software in its own environment, your file server in its own environment. All your servers can have their own environments but still run on one physical piece of hardware. That's a good reason for using virtualization right there, I think. Another reason is migration simplification. So we get into situations where we have an old server that's sitting there. We have a new piece of hardware we want to migrate to. Well, you could do a brick level rebuild on the whole entire thing and say, okay, we're going to slap a new OS down here. We're going to put, all the software dependencies down here. We're going to install our applications. We're going to migrate our databases, and then the system's going to be up and running. We'll redirect our workstations to change all that. Or we can just take and just bundle up our whole old environment and just slap it on a virtual machine on our new hardware, and poof, we're done. I've done that a few times. Now, I've seen some issues with doing that. A lot of times the old environment that you had, you're having to put it into a virtual environment, do a conversion from physical to virtual, which really isn't an issue. But depending on how complex your old environment was, if you have a ton of software with a lot of different dependencies that were already having a hard time communicating without conflicting with each other, migrating that whole entire mess into a virtual machine isn't going to actually help you. It's really just going to put an extra tangled web in there and make it even more difficult. It's really better, they say, to start virtualization from the ground up. This might be the last migration you ever go to. Once you get into the world of virtualized servers, you're there. And so moving those virtual machines onward if in the future is much easier than getting from physical hardware to a virtual solution. It can be done though just by using a simple conversion tool to just convert your whole existing environment, and boom, you're in the world of VMs. I do it all the time, but there are cases when I might want to say, when I want to do that. I talked a little bit about transportability. It's easy to take a VM from one server, copy the files to another server, install the virtualization layer onto the operating system, and boot the VM right up. Boom, you're done. So that's really nice. Now, in the larger data centers, they're using software where they might have a rack with 4, 5, 10, whatever servers, 20 servers in the thing, and they might have certain applications, certain virtual machines running on certain servers, and then they can physically power those servers down. If the rack doesn't need to run all of them, it can power some of those down, move the workloads, the virtual machines, onto other hardware and run them there. So that's kind of handy. In the small business realm, the transportability gets into how you're going, if you need to move your machines to a different site, by replicating them over the internet, different things like that. Virtual machines can become handy there. It also works out real well with recovery because the transportability ends up translating into an easier way to recover your systems from failure, assuming that you have virtual aware backup solutions and those kinds of things in place, and a strategy for recovering your virtual machines. One of the problems that I see with virtual machines is when you're using like disk-based backup solutions, you can't back up the whole partition that the virtual machine's running on because all those files change too much. These disk-based backup solutions can't handle the changes because it's a 15 gigabyte file or 50 gigabyte file that has a minor change to it, so its whole file's got to be replicated to the backup server. Not going to work very well. So really what we recommend is backup solutions inside of the VMs to back up the operating systems that are running inside the VMs, and other software that communicates with the virtualization software that can help us to bundle up just the incremental changes that are happening inside of those VMs rather than the whole entire virtual machine every time a change is made. The way that virtual machines work is fairly simple. You have a hardware layer, physical machine sitting there. It's running your operating system just like before, so your OS is laid on top of that. The virtual machine software then is just an application you install on your OS, just like a Microsoft Word or something. You just put that program in there, and then now you have options that you can enable and say, I want to make a new virtual machine, or I want to load an existing virtual machine, so on and so forth. Now, once you get there, you can have multiple virtual machines running. I wouldn't run more than 3 or 4 VMs on an average server these days that I'm picking up. Now, back to some of the pros here. Virtual machines utilize CPUs better. They save power. If you're running less hardware, then you're not turning as many power supplies, so that's saving some power. You can reconfigure the virtual machine hardware quicker. As a technician, it's easier for me to install RAM into a virtual machine than it is into a physical machine, because it's just a click, drop down, drag a bar. You got to have the RAM in the physical machine first, though. So the ability to move VMs, between physical hardware, to take a VM off of one machine and move it over to another. It's not as easy though as you sound. Sometimes you have to reactivate the license for Windows when you do that and things in a smaller business realm, so it's not like you can just move it between hardware real easy. Migrating legacy systems, just the ability to take that virtual machine and just wrap it up in its state and migrate it and have that thing running on a new hardware. I've taken physical machines off of really old hardware, put them into virtual machine environments, and just let them run there while I'm doing the migration many times. And of course, the ability to run these things in the cloud. All your cloud-based servers are all running pretty much as virtual machines in these big data centers, because this is really all about the cloud. And then, of course, failover capabilities. We might have, in my drawing here, which is kind of difficult to see in this video, you'll see that I have a piece of hardware here, operating system, the software, virtual machine, virtual machine, virtual machine, and then there's a replication channel going back to another piece of hardware running virtualization software. And so I can replicate those two virtual machines between two pieces of hardware, for example, and then if one was to go down, I'd have a much faster, easier failover. But that's really for high disaster replication, disaster recovery scenarios. So some cons real quickly here. VM software can be real complex to support, hard to support. The VM is another piece of software. It's added to your network. It's just like having any piece of software, and a piece of accounting software, or a piece of management software for your network, or a piece of any application that runs on a server is complex and isn't really designed to be user-friendly and easy. So what we end up with there is another layer of complexity. So it does add weight to your network. So it may take some weight away in some places, but it adds some weight back in other places too. The best practices to actually use virtual machines takes a little bit of education. It's not real easy to just, anybody can just jump in and start doing these things, but when you do, you'll start to see some issues. Oh, well, what happened? VMware won't start this morning. Oh no, all of our virtual machines are down, our network's crashed, and we go to start it and the service just says it's not working, it won't start. Where do we go for support? How do we fix this? So when you lose that hypervisor layer, the layer between your operating system and your virtual machines themselves, the hypervisor is that layer in between there, between those two, then when you lose that hypervisor, it really can mess with you, because all your virtual machines can be down. You might not be able to start them. It might be difficult to move them to another piece of hardware just because of reactivation requirements and Windows and different things like that, and then moving them back later. So it may not be worth it. There are best practices that you need to follow with these things, like how you go about just pausing and stopping and maintaining and managing these machines is real important. So those are a couple there. They require a different kind of backup software. Your traditional backup solutions aren't just going to translate right into virtual machines. You might have to have a special kind of backup software in addition to your regular backup software, so that can add some costs and some complexity in management. Virtual machines themselves can get corrupted. The physical hard disks in virtual machines are subject to corruption, just like a physical hard disk is too. So a virtual hard disk, it can get corrupted just like a physical one. And virtual hard disk corruption can happen from a variety of outside influences that can even affect the operating system. So the potential for corruption is there. And when it happens, if you don't have a proper recovery plan in place, which a lot of people, they kind of just say, oh, I've got virtual machines, I'm good. Sometimes there's a disconnect with how much software that you need to manage these virtual machines. So, if you're putting virtual machines on a piece of hardware, you overload the hardware with too many virtual machines, it's going to slow them all down, and they're not going to run well at all, and that's going to really make you unsatisfied too. And then, really to use the best features of virtual machines is really expensive. And so to get into having all the different really good softwares to migrate between hardware and replicate to offsite and have multiple hardware that can shut down if they're not being used, and all these powerful features, really does get into some pricey stuff. These things were originally designed for the big data centers. We're using them in a small business world, but technically the big high-end features are data center features, and those are priced for the data center buyers. So I hope you've enjoyed this video on virtualization, virtual machines, and hope you understand them a little bit better and what they're there for and how you can use them, how they apply to your business, and what some of the pros and cons are. Thanks, I'm Brandon Cross. Have a good day.